You open the fridge and realize prices have quietly shifted again, but you don't even have time to process it, because the next second, you're already looking outside at that tomato plant. It doesn't look like it is doing poorly. It looks like it has given up entirely. The leaves are curled up like paper, dried out in the sun. They are stuck tight against the stem, and the soil it is sitting in is the exact spot you carefully rescued. You did that just 2 days ago. You did everything right, watering, fertilizing, replacing the soil, even watching tutorial videos, and yet it is still dying. What is strange is that it doesn't feel like panic. It is something quieter than that. Like you're starting to realize the problem might not be you at all, but something you've been missing the whole time. You instinctively touch the soil, but it doesn't feel like soil anymore. It feels more like an unresponsive medium, either rock hard like a board pushing back against your fingers, or so brittle it crumbles into dust, or wet on the surface, but dry underneath. Like something that has lost its internal structure. And the most unsettling part is the way water behaves. It doesn't really go in anymore, it just passes through. It either sits on top like a thin film, or disappears instantly, as if nothing was ever watered at all. At that point, most people start repeating the same cycle. Change fertilizer, add nutrients, buy more expensive potting mix, or look for more professional formulas. Because we've been trained to believe one thing. If a plant has a problem, it must be missing something. Yellow leaves means nitrogen deficiency. Slow growth means not enough fertilizer. Poor results just means not enough input. But very few people stop and ask a more uncomfortable question. What if it is not a deficiency at all? What if the system itself is no longer functioning? Because truly healthy soil has never just been a container, it is a living structure. When you stick your hand into it, it responds. It doesn't resist, but it also doesn't collapse. It has this subtle elasticity and a slightly damp warmth. Even a kind of indescribable smell. Not foul, not pleasant, just a raw sense of something alive. Degraded soil is the opposite. It doesn't respond. It simply exists, like compressed residue, pressed down too many times. That is why so many people get stuck in a loop. It is not that they're lazy or don't know how to grow plants. They are trapped in a flawed logic. Leaf problem means add fertilizer. Slow growth means add growth booster. Bad results means buy another product. And the end result of that logic is always the same. You become increasingly dependent on external inputs, while the soil becomes less dependent on any living system outside of chemicals and intervention, until it turns into a kind of fillable material. It still looks usable, but it has lost its ability to self-repair. Ironically, a lot of premium potting soil is designed exactly for this state. At first, it looks perfect, dark, fluffy, clean, and uniform, like the ideal answer. But after a few weeks, it starts to settle, compact, and lose structure. Because what it is missing isn't nutrients, it is a living structure. There is no stable, microbial network, no mycelium network, no worm channels. There are no ongoing, ecological processes. And once you start looking at it from that perspective, you realize the real issue has always been underground, not in the leaves. Soil is not dirt, it is a city. In a single teaspoon of soil, there can be billions of bacteria. Mycelium threads that spread like a neural network. Protozoa feeding on bacteria and regulating balance. Nematodes moving nutrients around. Tiny arthropods breaking down organic matter. And earthworms acting like a construction crew, constantly rebuilding structure. Digging tunnels, transporting organic material, leaving nutrient-rich castings. Castings that restore airflow, water movement, and root access. Plants aren't just planted in it, they're participants. Through their roots, they release sugars, amino acids, and carbon compounds. In exchange for minerals and information, it is a trade system. But once you start managing soil through chemical fertilizers, deep tilling, sterilization, or stripping away surface cover, that system begins to fracture. The problem with synthetic fertilizer isn't that it doesn't work. It is that it works too directly. It bypasses the slow relationship-building process between plants and microbes. And it jumps straight to results. Short-term, plants look greener and grow faster. But underground, the network degrades, because the plant no longer needs to exchange, only to receive. Tilling soil seems logical too. It feels like you're taking care of the land. Freshly tilled soil always looks good, loose, even dark like a newly renovated room. But in that moment, you're destroying the entire underground structure. Mycelium networks are severed, stable soil, aggregates are broken apart. Moisture is suddenly exposed and lost. Carbon is released into the air and oxidized. The surface looks soft, but underneath, it is hollow. Bagged potting mixes have the same issue. They offer a short-term state, not a long-term system. That is why you often see the same pattern. Week 1 looks great. Week 2 is fine. Week 3 starts collapsing. Week 4 is unstable. And then you buy another bag and repeat the cycle. This is why people end up more and more exhausted from gardening. They're constantly fixing outcomes without realizing the system itself is degrading. And the real shift happens where you can't see it. When soil starts losing biological activity, there are subtle but consistent signals. Water becomes extreme. Either it won't penetrate at all, or it drains instantly. Plants become more disease-prone, leaf flavor weakens, earthworms disappear. Even the smell changes, the soft, humid, forest-like scent is gone. At that point, the turning point isn't what to add, but what to stop. Because restoring soil is not an additive process, it is a subtractive one. The most important step is often stopping frequent disturbance. Every deep tilling resets the system just as it begins to recover, breaking worm tunnels, cutting mycelium networks, and shattering microstructures. It may look like loosening, but in reality, it is losing order again. What works better is counterintuitive: reduce intervention. Let ground cover stay, let fallen leaves, straw, and small branches remain. And let kitchen compost remain on the surface. These aren't waste, they're system inputs. They do 3 things: retain moisture, block light, and regulate temperature, while slowly feeding microbial life so the ecosystem can rebuild. If you want to go a step further, you can make a simple activation mix. No fancy equipment needed, just a bucket of water, a bit of brown sugar, and some yeast. Stir it gently and let it sit until small bubbles appear. This isn't about making fertilizer, it is about kickstarting microbial activity. But what matters more than the recipe is how you use it. You don't dump it onto hot concrete soil under midday sun. That is basically wasted or even harmful. High heat and UV light quickly suppress microbial activity. The best time is early morning or evening, when the soil is cooler, still moist, and stable enough to accept biological activity. And then you start noticing subtle changes. The soil surface becomes less dead-looking. Water begins to infiltrate more slowly and naturally. At night, under a light, you might even see tiny movements. That is not magic, it is reconnection, but the biggest change isn't any of that. It is that you start needing to do less, not more. Because healthy soil is a self-organizing system. It doesn't depend on constant input, it depends on structural integrity. And when that structure returns, the most obvious shift isn't explosive yield, it is stability. Plants stop collapsing so easily, moisture stops swinging wildly, growth becomes steady and predictable, and at that point, the question quietly changes. Because you realize this isn't just about gardening anymore, it is about dependency. Most of our food system is built on long chains of reliance. Soil, factories, transportation, supermarkets, energy, and policy. Every link has to hold, or the whole system shakes. A restored soil system shortens that chain, not all the way to isolation, but enough to give you a buffer, something less exposed to external volatility. It doesn't remove you from the world, it gives you a foothold inside it. That is why, once you truly understand soil, the question stops being how to grow vegetables and becomes, what are we dependent on? We assume food comes from supermarkets, but supermarkets are just the final stop. Behind them are energy systems, logistics, climate conditions, finance, policy, and geopolitics. When any of those shift, the food system becomes fragile. A living soil system isn't about becoming fully self-sufficient. It is about maintaining a layer of resilience, a real, grounded source you can still rely on when uncertainty increases. It changes how you define wealth, because real wealth isn't a number on a bag or a concentration in a bottle. It is the rate of humus formation, the time water stays in the soil, whether roots can freely expand, whether earthworms come back. And none of that has a brand or a supply limit or a sudden stock-out risk. So the question ultimately comes down to something simple, but not easy. If one day external supply becomes unstable, will the soil beneath your feet still give you even a small buffer? Or more directly, right now, is your soil recovering? Or is it slowly turning into a quiet but functionally dead surface? Some changes don't make noise, but once they start, they don't easily stop. And the first real step isn't adding anything. It is stopping and noticing what you're still breaking.